All right, and good afternoon. Welcome to our On the Move Safely Wheelchair Securement series. This is session number 2, and we're going to be talking about some real world challenges and doing some troubleshooting of particularly difficult mobility devices to secure. So, again, thank you so much for being here. This session is being recorded, and the links will be available. I will email them to you when they are available. And we will get started. So my name's Tina Sanders. I'm a child passenger safety technician instructor. And one of my main focuses with that is school bus safety. With that, I have been studying and learning a lot about wheelchair securement, noting that wheelchair securement is kind of one of those things that isn't super well understood. There's a lot of intricacies that come along with it. So that's why this series was born. And I work for Safe Kids Grand Forks. So I'm here in Grand Forks, North Dakota. Very, very excited to be talking to you today on a actually beautiful 40 something degree December day. All right, so today I am going to do a little bit of a review of what we discussed last week. We're going to highlight kind of some troubleshooting of challenging devices. We're going to talk a little bit about that occupant securement and some of the challenges that we might face through that as well. So as a little bit of a recap, when we are securing mobility devices, wheelchairs or scooters or anything like that, it is required that they are forward facing. The only exception to that would be if you have a securement system that is specifically designed to be used rear facing. When we are securing the 4 corners of the wheelchair, 2 in the front, 2 in the back, the ones that are in the front should be placed wider, and then the securements in the back should be narrower. And there are 3 essential principles of securing a wheelchair that we highlighted in pretty great detail last week. So please look at that video if you weren't with us. But you want to secure to a solid or welded frame member of that wheelchair, just most solid part of the wheelchair that you can find, and never any moving or removable parts. So no wheels, no removable footrests, nothing like that. You want to strive for a 45-degree belt angle from the retractor in the floor to the attachment point on the wheelchair. It should be as close to 45 degrees as possible. That is going to give the wheelchair securement some downward pull to make sure that it stays put where it's supposed to be. It's going to keep it from tipping forward or back or side to side in routine driving situations. And then those straps should always follow a direct path. They need to be a straight path or as straight as possible from the retractor to the attachment point and never be crossed. And then this is a little diagram that I came up with to highlight those essential kind of rules for securement. So that'll be available to you if you need it as kind of a little cheat sheet. Now let's move into today's topics. So there are some laws that are there to protect people who use mobility devices. Just as a kind of aside here, this is a very, very brief overview of the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. These are very, very large acts that cover a lot of different functions and topics for people with disabilities. This is simply the parts that kind of delve into transportation and accessibility for people with mobility impairments. So I will, in my follow-up, provide some links so that if you had some other research that you'd like to do, you feel free to do so. But just to highlight how new both ADA and IDEA are, ADA was established in 1990, so it hasn't been around for terribly long, and it set civil rights laws governing a person with disabilities and the right of access to public transportation. So it guarantees the access for people using wheelchairs. The IDEA Act was passed in 1973, so again, not as old as we would like it to be. and it guarantees children with special needs the right to free and appropriate education. For students under IDEA Act, they are usually governed, their supports are usually governed by any one of several different documents, either an IEP, which is an individualized education program plan, an IFSP, individual family services plan, that covers children birth to age 3, or possibly a Section 504 plan, which protects the education rights for that student for any programs or activities that their peers would have. So while both of these acts absolutely guarantee that these individuals have right to access to any of these types of things, unfortunately, it does not govern safety standards. There are actually other sorts of bits of legislation that do govern safety standards. FMVSS 222, Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 222, is part of how we know what kinds of securement and occupant restraint systems should be available on school buses. So that's one of the things that was put into place. And there's a lot of different bodies that are in charge of creating policy, kind of setting those safety standards and that sort of thing. So National Highway Safety Administration, NHTSA, is one of the ones that does govern the passenger seating, crash protection. The Society of Automotive Engineers also is instrumental in governing the design, manufacture, and testing of wheelchair securement equipment. As we mentioned last time, though, there's a lot of variation when it comes to mobility devices, and a lot of them, pretty much most of them, if you check their users manuals, are going to say that they're not meant to be used as a seat in a motor vehicle. And we'll delve into that even more. So the best practice is to have the occupant transfer to the vehicle seat and use the installed restraint system, whether it is the lap and shoulder belt in that vehicle, or if it is a car seat or a booster seat if it's a child. So some mobility devices are challenging to secure. And because ADA protects the right of access to that person, if the device fits the definition of a mobility device, ADA will require that we transport it. Now, there are some exceptions. Sometimes agencies can have policies that will preclude the requirement to secure it as long as it aligns with the ADA laws. If there's a threat to the safety of the wheelchair user, the staff, or other passengers, then that can also lead to a legal refusal. But just to kind of be all on the same page, ADA defines a wheelchair as a mobility aid that has 3 or more wheels, that is usable indoors, and is designed for individuals with mobility impairments. So it has to meet all 3 of those bullet points. Now, like I said, best practice is to have that occupant transfer onto a vehicle seat out of their mobility device. With ADA, you can absolutely request that they do that, but they are not required to do so. ADA protects their right to stay within their wheelchair. You can also require that a wheelchair be secured while in transit, but you have to have an official policy on record. It's a little bit different for schools, but in public settings where ADA governs, you can have policies, but you can't deny a device simply because it can't be secured. You may also require the use of a lap and shoulder belt by policy, but only if it is required for everyone else seated in that vehicle on the regular vehicle seats. IDEA Act offers transportation to be listed as a related service within that child's IEP. It can also put into place requirements for the school district to provide specialized equipment and staff training to support that child's transportation needs for that service. So the use of vehicle restraint systems, the need for them to transfer from their mobility device to a seat, and any securement policies can actually be outlined in the IEP, and that would be protected by law. So just kind of to note, if you've got somebody who is refusing, for instance, the occupant protection system, the lap and shoulder belt. One of the things that you can put into place as policy is making sure that that refusal is documented. And even having them sign off, going, well, you've said that you do not want to use the lap and shoulder belt. Do you mind signing right here, just stating that you understand the risks of that? Sometimes that will help a person decide that, maybe I need to do that. So just something to maybe consider as a policy. All right. So let's identify some different types of devices out there and see if they qualify as a wheelchair according to the ADA definition. So remember, it's a mobility aid with 3 or more wheels. It needs to be usable indoors, and it needs to be designed for individuals with mobility impairments. So this first one right here is called a Barton chair. And I want you to take a quick glance at that, and let's see if this is a mobility device that's protected by ADA that we would need to transport in our bus. Alrighty, so it is a mobility aid with 3 or more wheels. It is usable indoors. And like I say down at the bottom there, it's for transporting, positioning, and moving patients and can be converted into a stretcher. Now, here's the rub with this device. It is not designed specifically for use with people with mobility impairments. This is used in a lot of different clinical settings and surgical settings. This is actually another view of one of those. I've seen it referred to as a stretch chair, which I thought was kind of funny, but this is another view and style of that device. So we actually would not probably want to transport this in our vehicle on our bus. All right, here's another one. I'll give you a second. Do you think that this qualifies via ADA as a mobility device? So it is a mobility aid with 3 or more wheels. It's actually a Jazzy mobility scooter. It's usable indoors, absolutely. And number 3, it is designed for individuals with mobility impairments. So according to ADA, it is a quote unquote wheelchair, and we would be required to transport it. All right, is this a wheelchair? This a mobility aid with 3 or more wheels. It's actually a Coluga stroller. You guys, it was very expensive. I looked it up online. It's a spendy one. We can use it indoors, but is it designed for individuals with mobility impairments? Nope, it's for infants and toddlers. Now this one. So it is, of course, a mobility aid. It's what's called a trotter mobility chair. So sometimes we actually have devices such as this that are referred to as a stroller. But as we can see here, this is actually defined as a wheelchair. It is designed specifically for individuals with mobility impairments, and so it is a mobility device. All right. I didn't even know one of these existed until I got to visit our friends in Florida at Q-Straint. But is this a mobility aid with 3 or more wheels? It's called a Rocket Mobility Axis 30 Action Track Chair. It has a track. The track has wheels inside of it, so I guess that counts. But is it usable indoors? No, we can't use that indoors. So it's not a mobility device that's protected by ADA. Okay, this one's silly, but what about a shopping cart? So I guess you could call it a mobility aid, right? Kids ride in it. It's usable indoors, but it is not designed for individuals with mobility impairments. And, when we were in Florida, I kind of chuckled at this one, but some of the folks that were in the room with us from larger areas did not seem as amused by it. And come to find out, there are some people with mobility impairments that, may not be able to afford their wheelchair, or their wheelchair broke. And sometimes they are utilizing things that they can find, like shopping carts. But unfortunately, there's not really a way to secure that in our vehicles. And so that would not be considered a mobility device. All right. So we need to remember that we can only refuse transport of a mobility device if it will pose a threat to the safety of other passengers. ADA does require transport even if the device cannot be properly secured, and even if the passenger refuses to use the occupant securement system. Obviously, in school settings, the situation may be a little bit different. That can be written into IEPs or 504 plans. Now, here's the thing. If a wheelchair does not fit onto the wheelchair lift, you can refuse to transport it because obviously you can't physically get it onto the vehicle to transport it. But if it can fit on the lift, it can be and legally is required to be transported. The problem that we're sometimes seeing, though, is that occasionally, more and more frequently these days, the lift has an actual larger securement size and weight capacity than the actual securement envelope inside of the vehicle. So these very large power chairs and things like that, they can fit onto those kind of standardized wheelchair lifts on buses. But once you get it on there, because the ADA requirements for the space that you have to set aside for wheelchair securement was set in the 1970s, 1990s, right in that area. Unfortunately, some of these larger mobility devices just don't fit. You are still required, though, to transport it via the ADA requirements. So keep that in mind that we do have some discrepancy when it comes to that. So we are going to cover a few things. We're going to cover some securement points for folding wheelchairs. I'm going to talk about some recline angles. I want to highlight a little bit for you WC19, and then we're going to talk a little bit about mobility scooters as well. So for folding wheelchairs, they have a lot of moving parts, makes their securement a little bit more challenging. Because they are really lightweight and transportable, they're able to fold and that sort of thing. They unfortunately will not crash test well. They've done a variety of different crash testing scenarios with them, and typically the chair does fail at even low speed crashes. However, we need to remember that especially with regard to buses, crashes are very rare. So our goal needs to be to keep that occupant inside their mobility device during routine driving conditions. That is our biggest need, our biggest goal, because a lot of injuries and even fatalities do happen from people being ejected from their chairs during quick stops and sharp turns and things like that. So we want to remember to secure to non-moving parts. So we don't want to use those removable footrests. We don't want to put it onto wheels. And sometimes there's crossbars like underneath and that sort of thing that allows the chair to collapse. We don't want to use those as our securement location. Sometimes getting into the spots that we need to in order to secure can be difficult. They may not be very easily accessible with that thick hook that we're using from our retractor. That's when webbing loops can become our best friend. But do keep in mind that if we're adding a webbing loop, we want to do so judiciously, because if the retractor isn't able to come out past its kind of dead zone, if we can't see the tag on our webbing, then the retractor is not going to lock. So we need to be able to make that securement without hiding the tag.
All right, so when we're using a folding chair, obviously if a person rolls up with a folding wheelchair, that is their mobility device, and we need to grant their access. We need to help them to secure it. This is obviously a chair with a lot of moving parts. So with that in mind, we need to find securement spots that are non-moving, basically none of our parts that are going to collapse on us, nothing that's supposed to move. We want to look for, again, those solid or welded frame members rather than anything collapsible like the crossbars under here. So for me, I would probably choose here or here for my securement. So sometimes we're not able to get into a good spot with the hook itself. So perhaps using our webbing loops, we can use the webbing loop to, having a hard time doing this one hand. We can make our securement spot that way instead. All right, so.
All right, so big thanks to our coordinator, Karma, for filming all of these videos that you're going to see today. Appreciate you. And also to the folks at the All True Performance Center for not only loaning me their space, but loaning me all of these beautiful wheelchairs that you're going to see throughout today. So just a big thank you. Now, sometimes we will be working with mobility devices that are reclined at any number of angles. Typically, if an individual needs a reclined posture, it's because they need to protect their airway or they have some other medical need that requires them to be at that angle. Therefore, transferring to the vehicle seat, even though that is our best practice, would be basically impossible. Now, if they are small children, typically under 40 or 50 pounds, they may be able to ride rear facing in a properly installed car seat on like a school bus or in a passenger vehicle. Municipal buses, installing a car seat is typically not an option. They don't have seat belts and they don't have lower anchor hooks or anything like that. But once we kind of come to a need for a forward-facing seating position, there's virtually no options out there that offer a whole lot of recline for people who need it. So once a person exceeds that, 65 pounds for car seats or for at least one bus only seating situation, about 105 pounds, once they exceed that, there's not really any reclined options. Therefore, transporting in their chair may actually be the safest option for them. The challenge really, really is then the shoulder belt fit for those reclined passengers, because we've got that retractor that's up on the wall. We've got a person that's sitting kind of at a much steeper angle. So getting the shoulder belt to sit near enough their body without kind of sitting really far away from them so that in any kind of incident, that seatbelt's going to hold them in place is pretty challenging. Obviously, we talked last week, we can move that retractor up and down either on the L track or using the shoulder belt adjuster that's located below the retractor. But sometimes, and you're going to see in our little video here in just a second, you can actually move the entire wheelchair to kind of get that angle a little bit better. So let's take a look at what that looks like.
Finding a good fit for the shoulder belt may be difficult. So sometimes if the recline is particularly steep, we may have that belt hanging way out here. We're going to want to adjust the belt as much as possible, but sometimes the best way to fix this issue is to actually move the wheelchair in place to give them a little bit more distance from that retractor, and that's going to help you achieve that angle a little bit easier.
Now our WC19 wheelchairs, these are wheelchairs that have met some safety standards for, different crash tested situations. So they typically, the securement points are reinforced, the actual frame of the chair is reinforced, and they have an optional crash tested lap belt that can be installed. They're going to have some standardized markings in them as well. There are some specific needs that you have to meet in order to use like the lap belt that's inside the seat. Keep in mind that unless that chair specifies that it is a WC19 and further that the lap belt is the WC19 crash tested lap belt, consider it just a positioning device and use the lap and shoulder belt that goes with the securement system that you have.
All right, so we've adjusted our belt adjuster to make sure that our shoulder belt is sitting on her shoulder, not rubbing up on her neck and not off the side. And then of course we've made sure that our buckle is at her hip. That is going to help us to make sure that we've got the lap belt fitting right across her hips, where that's going to be the strongest parts of her body. So with that, we've got the lap and shoulder belt in place. When it comes to the WC19 wheelchairs, the Lap belt oftentimes is a crash tested belt, the one that's actually installed in the wheelchair. All you'll have to do then is attach the shoulder belt to the lap belt. However, it requires one of these kind of hefty retractors in back in order to achieve the crash testing standards that they tested it for. So if you've got the smaller retractors in the back when you are hooking up that lap belt to the internal, or the shoulder belt to the internal lap belt, you need to use one of these much thicker retractors.
So I said a couple of times, you need a set of them in the back because there's a lot more load that is put onto the retractor when you're using an internal seat belt in there. So those heftier retractors are required when you are using that. If you don't know if the belt is a WC19, or if you don't know if your retractors are those ones that are made for that, no problem. You can just use the lap and shoulder belt system that goes with the retractor system that you already have. So either way, you can absolutely properly secure that person. The retractors that would go with that, they're usually referred to as WC18. That is the governing system for the securement system itself. Now I got to play around with a four-wheel scooter and do a little bit of securement. One of the things that I wasn't able to get my hands on for this demonstration was a three-wheeled scooter, but I wanted to kind of highlight those because they are a fairly popular mobility device. And with those, they have what's called a tiller in the front. It's basically what holds the steering wheel. And those tillers are fragile. They break pretty easily. So they actually do make some securement straps that you can use to go around the base of that tiller in order to attach to the retractors. They also have third rear securement systems. So you would have 3 securements in the back of them. Mobility scooters are a challenging thing because they are usually very heavy. They're very large. Oftentimes they're very, very long. They're also very much not meant to be used as a seat within the vehicle. And so they can be really challenging to secure. And it's also really challenging, of course, to get a good fit of a lap shoulder belt. So I got to hang out and use a Jazzy scooter.
So mobility scooters can be very challenging. This happens to be a 4-wheel Jazzy scooter. The 3-wheel scooters oftentimes will have a steering wheel and a pole in the front. Keep in mind that those poles are extremely fragile. They break very easily. They are not great for securement unless you are securing, and there are actually some securement straps that you can use specifically for those. With this particular Jazzy, we have a center post in the front that the seat is attached to. So for this one, my choice would be to wrap one of my webbing straps around that. And then I'm going to actually attach one side of it to one retractor. Karma, can you push that red button? And one side to the other. Now, this is not a fantastic angle for this, unfortunately, but with regard to these mobility scooters, sometimes when we're talking good, better, best, we're only going to be in that good frame because, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of options. We do have this welded cross member right here that might be a viable option, but if I'm trying to hook it with my hook, that is not going to hook around there. So once again, I'm going to use some form of my webbing loops. You know, whether I loop that on there like that, these smaller ones might give me even a better angle. and then loop it around. And that can give us our securement. But again, you know, we don't have a lot of choices. We would not want to use this armrest bar because it's not welded, it's actually bolted. We don't want to use this even though it is welded because it's attached to the wheel. So really, this is our best bet right here. If it were me, in order to assess this chair, if weather allowed, I would have the person stay outside of the vehicle for a few moments so that I can walk around it and kind of take a look to make sure that I can find good securement points before I get into that cramped vehicle.
But one of the policies that I urge agencies to put into place is to have some pre-trip inspection systems in place. So if you are going to be securing a device you haven't seen before, doing a pre-trip inspection outside of the vehicle would be very, very advantageous so that you have more space to kind of look for those good securement spots. Having a checklist to kind of let your operator go through and know exactly what they're dealing with would be really, really important. Another thing is anything that's removable, so backpacks and trays and other devices, if they can be removed, we strongly encourage that they are removed because they can become projectiles. And that goes with also any medical equipment like oxygen tanks or anything like that, making sure that they are properly secured so that they also don't become projectiles. One of the things that can be really, really beneficial, especially if you have maybe substitute drivers or anything like that, is to mark the location for securement with either stickers or tape or zip ties or a marker or something like that, so that those spaces can be utilized over and over once you've determined that it's a good spot. One of the things that should also be policy is making sure that for those mobility scooters that can be very, very challenging to secure, please request that passenger transfer, make that a policy. It is well within their right to refuse because of ADA, but it is strongly recommended that it's a policy for every scooter with no exceptions.
Fun. Okay, so this is the location that is kind of designated for securement. This is not a WC19 chair, it's a different logo. And frankly, the angle here is far more than that 45-degree angle that we're aiming for. If the operator feels like that's too steep an angle and that's not going to be a great securement, you could choose a different spot. You might choose right here and use a webbing loop. Obviously that's not a moving part, so that would be fine. I would probably stay away from this. This is something that's bolted on. That might not be a great location. So it is always up to the operator as to where they want to go. One thing that I would do once I've determined on a wheelchair where I'm going to secure it if they are coming to me to travel often is I might mark it, you know, with a Sharpie, with a zip tie, with a sticker. I'm going to mark the location so that I don't have to guess every single time this person shows up.
We want to prioritize those 45-degree belt angles. So if you've got maybe a folding chair and you don't have a perfect solid frame member to attach to, or, you know, maybe you have to have a little half twist or something, I would take that over having a really low angle, because as you can see in the picture, if you've got a super low angle, that device is going to very easily tip. So we want to prioritize that 45-degree angle. With our large power chairs, we want to make sure that they are powered off. We want to lock wheels, and we want to lock the wheels every single time we are securing, don't get me wrong, but we want to make sure that these very large chairs aren't going to be able to move and cause injury. Making sure that they have a securement spot, whether they are clearly marked or they're not, just making sure that you've got a good one that's going to prioritize that angle is going to be very, very helpful. Now, sometimes we have some reticence on the occupant's part to be using the lap and shoulder belt. And so sometimes that comes right down to our approach with that occupant, with that passenger. So making sure that you use a friendly tone and you smile, making sure that you get to, eye level, you're not, lording over a person and explain what you're doing. Engage them to help with what you're doing. Can you hold on to this belt right here while I grab the connector? And they know their device better than anybody. So, is it better to connect here versus here? And then just to make sure that everybody is safe and we are avoiding any inappropriate touch, just make sure that you're using the back of your hand facing the passenger when you're routing any belts. At the end of the day, you should be securing that person the same way that your securement system fits on you when you're driving your own vehicle. So keep that in mind when you are looking at the belt fit for that person. Now, our language can absolutely make all the difference in whether or not that person is going to want to use their lap and shoulder belt. First of all, know your equipment. If you are at all hesitant about how it operates, that person's going to go, you know what, this is going to take too long, never mind. Or they're going to feel like they're strongly inconveniencing the operator, and they're going to say, no, I don't really need that. And they do. This is safety equipment. So you wouldn't want to say, you don't want me to put this thing on, do you? Or, do you want your lap and shoulder belt on? Do you want your seatbelt on? These are all language choices that would minimize the importance of that device. And it is really, really important that even if there is a wheelchair seatbelt, that's usually a positioning device. So we need to use the lap and shoulder belt. So instead of saying something like this, it's going to be a lot better to matter of factly say, I'm going to secure your lap and shoulder belt now. Explain to them exactly what you're going to do, but don't pose it as a question. Make it just your natural next step in the process. And I feel like that makes all the difference in the world. The other thing is definitely, definitely make it policy that this is what you do with every single individual, and know your equipment really, really well. The better you know that equipment, the less hesitation you're going to have. And frankly, the more successful you are going to be at keeping your routes on time, because it's not going to take nearly as much time to figure out kind of how to do that securement. The occupant securement portion of that is the kind of the least intuitive and the most variables that you can have. So just knowing your equipment is really important. Oh, with the driver shopping
Sorry, it took
carts
me a second to
qualified.
get.
Yeah. Those are are you talking about the little mobility scooters that you see at the grocery store?
Yeah, I'm just um
Yeah,
yes.
those are just like any other mobility vehicle. I mean, I would hope they wouldn't steal the mobility device from like
Right.
Walmart or something, but that would be the same kind of thing as any other mobility scooter. My like kind of goofy example was the metal shopping carts. We don't want to see those secured on buses.
Right. Thank
When
you.
I send out, yeah, absolutely. When I send out all this information, you'll have all of the videos so that you can kind of watch that. I know I had to skip through them, kicking myself that I didn't make these sessions longer, but I do appreciate you. After the new year, we will have session number 3, which is innovations in the future of securement. I'm going to kind of delve into a few different policies that I've come across over my time doing this to offer them to you as, something that you might integrate. And we're also going to look at some of the cool new products that are out there and how they're utilized. So I look forward to that. Everyone, I very much appreciate you. And again, big thanks to both of our friends with Minnesota and with North Dakota, as well as all of our wonderful support from Q Strength. So thank you very much. And we'll see you after the new year.